Hey, I know you know who Major Taylor is, but do you really know Major Taylor? Well, stick around for this episode because we're going to tell you a whole lot more about the man and the racer. Buckle up that helmet strap and clip in. It's time for the Louisville Cycling Podcast, the podcast that celebrates the people, rides, and events that make Louisville and the surrounding area a great place to ride a bike. If cycling is a big part of who you are, then you probably already know the name Major Taylor. But do you really know the full story behind this amazing athlete and his importance in the social fabric of cycling? In this episode, I talk with Kisha Tandy, Curator of Social History at the Indiana Museum and Historic Sites. We're discussing Major Taylor, fastest cyclist in the world, an interactive experience examining the life and career of champion bicycle racer and Indianapolis native Marshall Major Taylor. It opens March 5th and runs through October 23rd at the Indiana State Museum. Kisha is one of the curators behind the exhibit, and after listening to our discussion, I think you'll agree a trip to Indianapolis might just find its way on our to-do list. Well, Kisha, thank you for being on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk about the Indiana State Museum and, in particular, a current exhibit that I think my audience is going to love.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, before we start talking about Major Taylor and the exhibit, tell me a little bit about the Indiana State Museum.
The Indiana State Museum and Historic Sites is in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we here celebrate the stories of people from Indiana. We present history, art, and natural history. And we have historic sites throughout the state so that you can learn about people not just from Indianapolis, but from all over the state.
Great. Well, now, your title is Curator of Social History. So what do you do in that role?
As the Curator of Social History, I spend a lot of time researching individuals and events and places that have had impact on Indiana and significant places and events. And I spend a lot of time looking at newspaper clippings, going through other historical repositories, and finding information. Also, as part of my responsibilities, I go out and meet with potential donors that will donate artifacts back to the museum, and then those materials will be used to, again, help tell the story of Indiana's history and then eventually go on exhibit in the museum galleries. In addition, I also spend a lot of time looking for photographs and trying to connect the stories that we tell to various individuals and sharing them with the public and hopefully engaging with the public to really talk about the history of Indiana.
So what led you to Major Taylor?
Well, this work with Major Taylor has been something that I have been doing since I've arrived at the museum. I started at the museum in 2001, and the curator, Ardell Ogden, had already acquired this collection from Major Taylor's only daughter, Rita Sidney Taylor. She had donated the collection to the museum in 1988. And this collection is a significant collection chronicling the life of Major Taylor. The collection includes 9 scrapbooks. And when I talk about scrapbooks, these are books that are full of newspaper articles, clippings, different pieces of materials from his many racing victories, his losses. It also includes some photographs in the scrapbooks, and they're just various pieces that really help to tell his story and really help to chronicle his story. One of the earliest articles is from December of 1896,
Wow.
And Major would become a professional cyclist in 1896. In addition, in this collection, we have letters. The letters pretty much date to 1909, and they are to his daughter, again, Rita Sidney Taylor Brown. She always went by Sidney, and his wife, Daisy Victoria Morris. Taylor. And in these letters, you really get to learn about Major, his love for his wife, his love for his daughter, his commitment to his training, because by the time he's writing these letters in 1909, he's an older racer, he's a little bit heavier racer, and he has been through a lot. And you can see through these letters just how committed he is to being an athlete, his training. You see sorrow from not winning as much as he did, but also just complete commitment. And what I also like about these letters is that these are not short letters. These are letters that are multi-page letters. And, you can tell that he might have started writing one day and finished the next.
Yeah.
And so it just really gives you a great glimpse into his life. And he's writing from overseas at this time. The collection also includes postcards. And these postcards date to before he married Daisy. Then you have the postcards that include him writing to his daughter, Sydney. And so they span many years. And the postcards are great at providing locations where Taylor raced.
Yeah.
So you might have a postcard from Paris or from Berlin. And so it's just a really good way to demonstrate the many different places where Taylor would have had competitions, and really showcasing that he was an international superstar. There are 2 trophies that are part of this collection. Both are from 1901. One is from Berlin and one is from Paris. And that was he won that against the race with Edward Jacqueline.
Mm-hmm.
And so this collection is truly significant. And he even notes that he used different things from this collection to help write his autobiography, which would be published in 1928. And this collection serves as a foundation for the exhibition. So as a curator, I care for the collection. I work to do scans and to make sure that it is available online for people to come and to research. When researchers come to review the collection, I am the person that works with them. So for about 20 years, I've actually been working with the collection and learning. And, and even though working all that time, as we were working on this exhibit, I was learning new things because I had the opportunity to research specific events and specific dates. And so I am still continuing to learn about Major Taylor. But I will tell you, having those scrapbooks have been such a help and a terrific way to learn about someone's life.
Yeah. And this really sounds like a silly question to ask for a cycling audience, but who is Major Taylor and why is he important?
So Marshall Major Taylor was a champion cyclist. He was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, November 26, 1878. And his family, his parents, were Gilbert and Sophronia Taylor, and they came to Indianapolis from Kentucky. And they would live here, and his father, Gilbert, would be a coachman for the Southard family, Albert B. Southard. And Mr. Southard would have a son. His son was Daniel, referred to as Dan. And Daniel was born in July of 1878. Major was born November of 1878. And so in Major's autobiography, he talks about he and Dan being playmates and companions. And when Dan received a bicycle, Major also received a bicycle. So you can see the beginnings of his story through this relationship that stemmed from his father's employer. And so early on, he received this bicycle. He learned how to ride. He learned how to do trick riding. And his trick riding was something that caught the attention of bicycle owners. One day, Major had gone in to get a repair fix to the Hay and Willits bicycle shop, which was in downtown Indianapolis. And they took note when he did a trick. And then he would be hired to perform tricks and do some teaching and things for the bicycle shop. And from there, he would start to enter his first races. He would eventually also work for another cycling shop here in Indianapolis as well. And so his early races, and so he was racing as early as age 11. We found a newspaper article where he had raced in the year 1890, and it was during the summer of 1890, so he would have been 11.
Wow.
And he was racing it, and what was so interesting is that he was already being referred to as Major Taylor. And so this very early start here in Indianapolis, and on his way to becoming a champion cyclist. He would stay in Indianapolis until 1895, and then he would leave with a friend and mentor, Bertie Munger, and he would go to Worcester, Massachusetts. Also, while he was here, of course, he was racing. He would race with and train with a group called the Seesaw Cycling Club, which was a black cycling club here in Indianapolis. And so very early, his commitment to training, his commitment to learning, and it's recorded that when they left Indianapolis, Munger, proclaimed that Major Taylor would return as a champion cyclist. And
Wow.
eventually, that is true. Major Taylor would return as a champion cyclist.
So where did the moniker Major come from?
So he jokes about it in his book that there were many different ways, but the most reliable and what most people think that he received his nickname was from the fact that he wore a military style uniform during his early performances of working in the bicycle shop. And it's interesting to note that his father actually had been a Civil War soldier. So where this uniform came from, things like that, we don't know. But most people use that this name came from him wearing a style of military uniform as he worked in the bicycle shop.
Okay. Why is the story of Major Taylor important from a social history perspective?
From a social history perspective, is that when you look at Major Taylor's life in the context of what was happening in the world, Major Taylor was born in 1878. Since we were not too far from fighting the Civil War at that time, and as he was growing up, the many different things that he had to deal with, especially as a cyclist and living in a world where you had, as Major referred to it, as that dreadful monster prejudice, and what he had to deal with. He was one of 8 children, and so he's from a large family here in Indianapolis. And what did Indianapolis look like? What did this country look like during that time? Major talks about his experiences as a cyclist and not having the opportunity to stay in certain hotels, being able to eat in certain places, having riders go up against him, and the fact that there was just so much segregation, and he had to deal with that, and he would overcome those challenges, and he was just resilient in everything that he did. I think about the letter that he wrote in 1894 in response to the League of American Women, to their desire to bar blacks from joining the organization and from riding, and that in 1894 he wrote a letter to the Bearings magazine, and it was a rebuttal against this, and that just is such a young man that he saw this injustice and said no, he had to speak out against it. And so he's dealing with these various things throughout his career. It was a constant, but he did not give up. And so his story is one of, yes, that he had to deal with those things. And he even says, in his book that he only wanted the opportunity. He wasn't looking for an advantage, just the opportunity. And he stressed that he always played the game fairly and tried his hardest. And so he didn't, give in to various things. And He just really worked hard. He stayed dedicated and committed, and he was able to achieve. And so his story is one of inspiration, of not giving up and facing obstacles. And we see all of that throughout his life.
So when we think about Major Taylor and his story, what can his story tell us about some of the challenges we face today?
His story, really, it just tells us that you can overcome those many different obstacles. And that is what I see when I think about Major Taylor, is that he really did work to overcome the various things. I mean, you think about Major and his his work ethic and his traveling and being an international superstar well before many people, and that he would be recognized, and he's going to different countries, and he is not giving up, and the challenges that he faced, he just did not give up, and he kept
Mm-hmm.
going. And I think about his daughter, Sydney Taylor Brown. She lived a very, very long time, and she talks about how he was denied different opportunities, and that he faced, racial prejudice, and he suffered mental and financial collapse, and she shares these different things. But within all of that, you see this man who was victorious and had a long career. And he wrote, even in his autobiography, that he wrote this autobiography as an inspiration for the young people that would come behind him, and specifically people that look like him, that he was writing this story for those that would come behind him, so that, they could know how to better respond and maybe not have to go through some of the different things that he went through.
Yeah.
And I think about that, and I'm like, that's so honorable. And that is one of the things that I think about Taylor, is a man of honor. And that definitely is in there.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the experience of visiting the Major Taylor exhibit.
So the Major Taylor, fastest cyclist in the world, and it will be open until October 23rd. It tells the story of a remarkable athlete. We start off actually kind of giving the visitors an artistic introduction to his life. So we had a local artist, Walter Loban Hamilton. He came in, he looked at the collection, and he used different pieces of the collection to create an experience that is kind of representative of a track. And so on one side, you see clippings from Major Taylor's life. The other side, you see different pieces of letters that he has written to his wife and daughter. And so you'll see where he's like little Sydney Bear, and you get a kind of glimpse of who Major is. And then the back wall are just images of Major Taylor and his family and the trophy. And so you visually get to see Major immediately. And the headlines that, will eventually just say it all. And then there's a piece of artwork that has three sides, and you see three different images of Taylor. In addition, there is a poem called Major Deal that was written and performed by a local artist here in Indianapolis, January York. And she also came in and reviewed the collection and wrote this poem. And it is indeed a major deal. She tells his life story in about 4 minutes, and it is incredible the way that we introduce visitors to the life of Major Taylor. Then visitors can go in and learn about his early beginnings here in Indianapolis, where he lived, and the early races, as well as the cycling craze that was taking place here in the city. We have here borrowed from the United States Bicycle Hall of Fame in Davis, California, one of the bicycles that Major Taylor rode. It is the only one that I know of in existence that we can trace back to Major Taylor, and that is on display and is definitely a highlight of the exhibit.
Mm-hmm.
And within that area, we also have the 2 trophies that Major Taylor won that were donated to the museum by his daughter, Rita Sidney Taylor Brown. We then have an area where you learn a little bit more about his wife and daughter and his relationship in that family. And within that area, it's interesting because we also highlight his religious background and his beliefs. And that we have 2 Bibles in the collection, and one of the Bibles is on display right now. And one of the quotes that we use talks about how Major would pray before his races. And so it's a really impactful to be able to see that. We also use a map to show the various places where Major is racing throughout his career. So beginning in the United States and then eventually going overseas to places like Berlin and Paris and Sydney, Australia, which his daughter was born in Sydney and she's named Sydney. And that is one of the areas where visitors really seem to interact and engage, learning about where he's going. You can hear a actor perform and read Major Taylor's letters. Now, we do not know what Major Taylor sounded like. We don't know what his voice sounded like, but his great-granddaughter listened to the actors that had submitted their audition tapes, and she heard his voice, and the actor that eventually was agreed upon to be the voice of Major Taylor, Dominique Selby, she heard in him her father's voice,
Oh,
and that it sounded like a man who loved his wife and daughter. And so he reads various letters and postcards from Major Taylor. We also look at the experiences of Major Taylor's life, and that is in the training room. And when I'm giving tours, the training room is where I really stop and kind of like take a moment to really engage the visitors in this area, because it is in this area that we talk about his training,
mm-hmm.
but it's also in this area where we talk about the many difficulties that he faced as a cyclist during this time period. Because Major is racing, becomes a professional in 1896. By 1898, he has 7 world records. By 1899, he is the world 1-mile champion, and in 1900, he is American sprint champion. So you can see he is just progressing and progressing and
Yeah.
progressing. 1901, he's going overseas, and he would continue to go on. And so here we talk about the difficulties and challenges that he is facing. He kept in his scrapbooks the good and the bad. And so there is one image from a newspaper where someone is elbowing him. And then we talk about how W.E. Becker in September of 1897 choked him. The newspaper says, essentially choked him into insensibility, and that
Wow.
he was almost unconscious for about 15 minutes, and the police had to intervene. And so that gives the visitors a glimpse of some of the things that Major Taylor is going through. And also in this area, we have 2 lockers, one for Major and one for Floyd McFarlane, who was one of the racers that is well documented, that went up against Taylor, was very mean to Taylor, was essentially a nemesis towards Taylor.
Yeah.
And so you get to see this kind of juxtaposition of Taylor's life and then the negativity that came from Floyd McFarlane. And that's one of the areas that really is intense, but it speaks to all the things that Taylor had to go through. And again, also we talk about his training, because he had a regiment, and Major did not drink, and he just had clean living, and he really sought to have clean living. And so that's an area that we talk about. And then we had interviews with cyclists from today, including Justin Williams. And so visitors can push a video and you can learn about Justin Williams and how Major Taylor inspired him.
Yeah.
And then there are some opportunities for our guests to, one, race Major Taylor, and that's a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
There, there you have some of Major's records, and then we have these bikes, and then there's one that is a hand crank bike that you can get on the bicycle and you can try to race against Major, and Major's going around, and you may or may not have made it around. So
Yeah.
that's actually pretty fun. We
Has
have.
anybody ever beat Major Taylor in a race at
I
the
do
museum?
not believe so. I mean, it
Yeah.
is really hard, and I mean, his records. Whoa, but it's fun to watch people try.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
I have done it, so I can tell you from experience. I'll just laugh, and that'll give you my answer. It is not easy.
Did he race in Louisville?
He raced throughout the United States, and he did race in the South. As of speaking right now, I cannot recall a Louisville race where he actually raced in.
Okay.
So from right now, I cannot recall one, but he raced throughout the United States.
Yeah. So going through this exhibit, what is something that someone would see or run into in the exhibit that might surprise a cyclist to learn about Major Taylor?
So I am not a cyclist, but I will tell you some of the different things that I learned. And it was just his strategy and just how strategic he actually was. And from his jumps and to his responses from the being boxed in or different things by the different riders. And so I think as a non-cyclist, that is definitely something that I learned. For individuals who are cyclists, just I think learning about all of the records that he had, the number of races that he had, the fact that he did his professional debut was in 1896, and it was at Madison Square Garden, and it
Wow.
was a 6-day race. I
Yeah.
mean, this is Major's debut as a professional, and he's known as a as a sprinter, as a champion speed cyclist. So I think that might be something that if you don't know Major's story, that could be something that could surprise you because this was an endurance race, whereas his other races were, short track and various things like that. But I think throughout it all, visitors, cyclists, non-cyclists, they can just really learn about a remarkable athlete,
Yeah.
someone who raced for several years and who really put the effort into perfecting his sport, and I think that's something that no matter your background, you can learn that about his life.
Now, Kisha, in terms of socially important historical figures, where would you put Major Taylor?
He's definitely right up there. I mean, Major Taylor, again, I go back to his birth date, 1878. He was achieving so much so early, and he had to, he talks about that he was a pioneer and he had to blaze his own trail. And that is indeed what he did. He was a pioneer. He was the first to do so many different things. And how he navigated his life, that definitely was a trail that he had to blaze. And it's interesting because he wrote this autobiography and he kept these scrapbooks. And so I often just think Taylor knew that he was going to tell his story and that he had some sense, not that he was someone who was being, bold and full of himself, but he had some awareness of what was taking place in his life and what he was achieving. And so the idea that he had this forethought to keep all of these materials it's just something that I can appreciate. And as a historian, being able to go back and to look at someone's life through their memories, through their record keeping, that is pretty spectacular.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go over all the details of the exhibit. When can you visit? How do you get tickets? What are all the things listeners need to know to come and see this amazing Major Taylor exhibit?
Okay, so again, it's Major Taylor, fastest cyclist in the world, at the Indiana State Museum in Indianapolis, Indiana. You can go to indianamuseum.org and purchase tickets there. The museum is open Tuesday through Sunday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and you're welcome to visit anytime during those hours. You can purchase tickets the day of, and there are plenty of activities that you can do once you are inside of the exhibit. And our website does have information that you can also learn about Major Taylor. So we have a web page dedicated to Major Taylor that talks about the exhibit and how some of the activities that are there. In addition, there is a tour that you can download, and this tour highlights some of the places that Major Taylor would have visited or raised here in Indianapolis, and then also some of the things that are a legacy to Major Taylor here in Indianapolis. For example, in September of 2021, there was a mural that was painted by Chicago artist Sean Michael Warren, and that is downtown Indianapolis. There is a public sculpture piece that's part of the Talking Wall on the Indianapolis Cultural Trail that visitors can go and visit. So it's these various places around Indianapolis that speak to the legacy of Major Taylor, and that also includes the Major Taylor Velodrome, which opened here in 1982.
Yeah.
So you can download that from the State Museum website, and again, find additional information about Major Taylor's life.
Well, I tell you, I'm ready to go. I want to see the exhibit. It sounds really cool. The Louisville Cycling Podcast is sponsored by United Financial Group. You know, I'm just going to cut to the chase. Over the years, the United Financial Group has been hugely supportive of the Louisville Cycling Podcast. So if you're looking to buy a home or maybe refinance an existing mortgage, why not at least reach out and see what they can do for you? You can contact me or just email John at ufglending.com and find the best deal and the best people to work with when it comes to getting a mortgage for your home. Kisha, I'm going to transition a little bit here. Whenever I have somebody on a podcast, I always do something I call the lightning round, which is a couple just kind of, quick questions. And if you want to have some fun, I'm going to run you through the lightning round real quick. Does that sound okay?
That sounds okay.
Okay. So the first question is, what is the coolest thing about working for a museum?
Research. Easy. Research.
Oh, you like research?
Yes. And finding out new things and getting to see new things. There are things in our collection that I'm like, this is amazing. And, it's a blast. And so just researching those different objects, artifacts, and learning the story. Yes.
What exhibit or research have you done there at the museum that has made you change your mind about something?
I've done a lot of research on art and art history, and I am not an art historian. And so I have gained such an appreciation about all of the work and effort that goes into producing art. And that is something that I have appreciated learning during my time here as well. I'm also not a person who is a natural history. I'm not the science person. And because I work here at the State Museum, we have a tremendous natural history collection. And I've also been able to learn a lot about different pieces in that collection as well. So those two, I have not worked on an exhibit doing that, but just bearing witness to the work that the curators and colleagues that do here, that has also been a lot of fun and educational.
Great. What have you learned from your work on Major Taylor?
Wow, so much. So one of the things that I've learned from a research perspective is just about taking the time to go back and look at different things, even when there's been various dates and different things, but really going back to do some intense research, really going back, taking the time. For example, the scrapbooks. And I know I go back to the scrapbooks a lot, but they are just so important and vital to historian, to this collection. Major would incorporate different stories in between the stories that he's collecting about his life. So he might have a story about the colored soldiers alongside a story about his great race. And so that is something that has been really interesting as I've been going back and forth researching Major Taylor. I also learned a little bit more about his family. And, I knew that there were 8 children, but I had not put together everyone's name. And so that was something that I was able to work on while we were preparing for this exhibit.
Great. So you work in a museum. So I got to ask, what is the oldest relic you've either touched or seen up close through your work at the museum?
So we have fossils here. So that's probably, that would be the oldest things that I have seen.
Yeah. So what inspires you?
History and telling great stories and being able to share the stories that really have had an impact on not only Indiana history, but nationally and internationally, as the case with Major Taylor, and being able to share stories of people, of and about people that we may or may not know about. I mean, Major Taylor is such an important part to the history of Indianapolis, Indiana, and cycling in the cycling world, and not many people necessarily know about him. And so being able to really share his story, and not only him, but many other individuals. And that is definitely what motivates me, is just continue. And we continue to find information about people regularly.
It's funny because I'm sitting there listening to you, and I can hear it in your voice that you get excited about that, about history and people and all that. So I tell you, you can't hide it; it comes through.
Thank you.
So, how have museums changed in the past 10 to 20 years?
Definitely. So we've changed in the manner and how we present information, and the stories that we tell and how we tell those stories. And that has been significant. And the fact that we are places gathering to tell significant stories and to have courageous conversations as well.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about in this exhibit some pretty significant and challenging topics. Within this exhibit, we talk about racism. We talk about Major Taylor expressing, his dread of that dreadful monster prejudice. We're talking about a man who faced many challenges. And so these are things that we are having conversations in the exhibit about this. In fact, in the exhibit, we have an area where there are different books, and these books are geared toward younger readers so that they can read a story and then hopefully engage in a conversation with someone to talk about some of these sensitive topics, some of these challenging topics, but topics that need to be discussed because they are definitely part of his life and they are part of the records that he kept. And so that's definitely a way that museums have changed in the way that we discuss issues.
Yeah.
And just our presentation. And one of the things that I love about the work that we do here is the interactives that are part of the exhibits and how engaging that we can create an experience for the visitors so that they are learning, but they're also learning and doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, museums, you really don't just walk through and look at things anymore. It's really an immersive experience.
Yes, definitely. And within this experience, it truly is, because one of the other things that you get to do is that there's an opportunity to build a bike with the Infento bike kit.
Oh, wow.
But then you can also ride a bike in the exhibit. We have a track, a small track, but you can ride around on that bike. So that gives the visitors the opportunity to, yes, Major Taylor rode bicycles. The visitor has that opportunity as well. They can also learn how to fix a flat tire.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is this kind of engaging while learning about champion cyclist Major Taylor.
Yeah. Well, I know I want to go race Major Taylor and see how close I can come. Okay. Here's a tough one for you. What is your dream exhibit to curate?
So I have a futures list, and I would really like to have the opportunity to share, and this would be really great, some of the early Black women here in Indianapolis. So it's very much a local story, but it would be one of those stories that I would love to really see what I could do with that. So there are these women that I find in newspapers, and I just write their name down on the list, and they're my futures list.
Said, your job sounds so cool. I mean, you
is.
sound you sound like you have a lot of fun. Okay, now here's the most important question. After curating the Major Taylor exhibit, the fastest cyclist in the world, are you going to get a bike?
So, so yes, I said I must now, really work hard on cycling, which is really interesting because my little one rides his bike all the time, and we come downtown. The museum is downtown on the canal, and so he rides around all the time, and I usually work or sit somewhere, but I have been encouraged to ride more.
Yeah.
And so hopefully I will really get into doing that more because it's great exercise and it's great fun.
Well, Kisha, the last question I always ask is an important one. Who would you like to thank?
I would like to thank his great-granddaughter, Karen Brown Donovan, who throughout the time that I've worked on this collection, she has answered questions, so many questions, and she provided insight into, Sydney, his daughter, and her relationship with her father, the wonderful individuals that I work with every day, our experience team, and the exhibit they put together, because I'm a content specialist. They created this wonderful exhibit around this rich history.
Yeah.
And so our experience team, they were amazing, and they did such a great job. And everyone here that we work with, from education to the frontline staff people to the wonderful marketing staff who have promoted Taylor everywhere, I can genuinely say everyone in this building who I work with, who have found a way to incorporate Major Taylor in the work that we do every day, from virtual programming to different celebrations. It really has been a wonderful experience seeing this all come together. And then, the individuals in Indianapolis who have worked hard to honor Major Taylor from the beginning. And so there are so many people. And so I didn't give names, but the wonderful people who I've worked with in the building, out of the building on this project, thank you all very much.
Well, Kisha, I want to thank you and for sharing your thoughts on this exhibit and talking to me about it. I know I'm ready to get a bus and bring a whole group of Louisville cyclists up to Indianapolis to go through the exhibit. I think it'd be really, really cool, and I can't wait to get up and check it out. So thank you for taking the time tonight to chat with me. I know hopefully maybe I can run into you when you're there and say hello, but I know we'll certainly be coming that way to see this Major Taylor Fastest Cyclist in the World exhibit. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Louisville Cycling Podcast. If you aren't already a follower of the show, well, head on over to your favorite podcast player and hit that follow button now. It's the best way to make sure you never miss a single episode. And while you're at it, you can find out more about this and other shows I produce at my website, barrygary.com. That's BARRYGARY.com. You can also leave ideas and feedback at the site. And if all these internets aren't your kind of thing, you can also leave a voice message by using the show call-in number 502-208-6649. Well, that's it for this episode, but we'll be back soon with more reasons why Louisville and the surrounding area is a great place to ride a bike. Right now, though, I think it's time to get out and go for a ride.